Thank you for joining our second keynote lecturer. Right now, I will pass my microphone to my colleague, Dr. Susanna Wong, to introduce Dr. Joe VOS.
Good morning and good afternoon to our audience. Welcome to the keynote lecture number 2. And here we have Dr. Joe VOS. And I'm very happy to introduce him. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Susanna Wong from Gratia Christian College, and I'm a clinical person, and I don't do research. But as I look at Dr. VOS research, I get stimulated. I sense that there is a lot of interest and a lot of things going on there that I would be delighted, and I would love to explore. If I have more time in my life, that if I have a second life, I would go into experimental science, really. Like I said a little bit earlier, I was a little bit disappointed by seeing all Dr. VOS' hair has been shaved off. And before everybody is carried away by his look, by his special style, let me do a formal introduction of Dr. Joe VOS. He is a psychologist, philosopher, researcher, lecturer, and existential therapist. He works as senior researcher and senior lecturer at the Metanoia Institute in London, UK. His research focuses on topics around meaning of life, social justice, and the effectiveness of humanistic and existential therapies. So he's an all-around person. He chairs the International Meaning Events and Community, which organizes annual conferences, workshops, training, and cultural events. We can check that out in the website, meaning.org UK. He has over 100 publications. Actually, I'm very interested to read his book. I just get the information a little bit late, but I would, after this workshop, after the conference, I would really check into his books, including the books called Meaning in Life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners, published by Macmillan, 2017. And another one, Mental Health in Crisis, published by Sage, 2019. And The Economics of Meaning in Life, published by University Professors Press, 2020, and The Psychology of COVID-19, Sage, 2020. Well, you can read more on his website and his email in the conference handbook, okay? Well, Dr. VOS, we welcome you, and we anticipated a very interesting subject. I don't know how you handle it, but as I look at it, I wonder, how can you make something so abstract to be something so tangible? Meaning in life across cultures and times, an evidence-based overview is so interesting and so fascinating. Well, let me just hand over the time to you.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. And it's really a big honor and a big privilege that I can be here with you today. And it's a pity that I can't join you in person, but I can see some people online. I have two screens here, so that one screen is my PowerPoint, the other one is a second screen on which I can see a lot of all you lovely people. So again, thank you so much. So, I may be coughing a little bit. I'm unfortunately still recovering from a kind of a cold, so I hope that you will bear with me. So in this first hour, I'm going to talk about meaning in life across cultures and times, an evidence-based overview. And as we already heard in my very, very kind introduction, what I try to do is to actually combine research with clinical practice. That's what I do in my daily life. But also very much when I think about doing research, because on the one hand, I love to really go into like all the evidence bases, but I always ask the question, what can we do with this as well? So that is also what I'm going to do in this presentation, to merge the world of research and of clinical practice. In the second hour, what I'm going to do is in my workshop, I will talk more about how can we really apply all those research insights. So I'll go more then into the practical sides and we'll do some exercises then. But no worries, in this first hour, it's going to be mainly like some theory. I think that the chat box is available. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I hope to have a little bit of time at the end to answer some of the questions from the chat. That's often the thing that I find the most helpful when we have like a big group of people. Anyhow, let's get started with my first slide. Our teachers teach us how to write and to do math. Our parents teach us how to behave. Our governments teach us how to follow the law. But nobody teaches us how to live a meaningful life. It's a thing that we see in a lot of people. I see it in a lot of my own clients, for instance, that they really struggle to find out how they can live a meaningful life. So it's very logical. What they do is that they go to the bookstores. And I don't know how it is at your place, but if I go into any bookstores here in London, all the bookshelves are full with all the self-help books, which look quite interesting for the broad public. But the researcher in me starts to become a bit skeptical, and it's like, okay, looks interesting, but it's not really based on research. And very often, a lot of the self-help books seem to be quite incomplete or non-systematic, because it seems as if the authors are mainly focusing on the type of meaning that they find meaningful for themselves. But that meaning may not be really relevant for their readers. So often a lot of the self-help books seem to be imposing that type of meaning, seems to be kind of unsystematic. And although it can be inspiring, it may not fit each individual. And also what I see, a lot of the books come from a religious or a spiritual background. And a lot of people find it interesting and very inspiring. However, you do not need to be religious or spiritual to actually live a meaningful life, as you will hopefully be aware. So there seems to be a big subjective bias in a lot of those self-help books. And this is what I often call McMeaning, in a kind of a joke, because McMeaning is like the kind of existential fast food that can make us feel very happy now. For instance, after reading one of those books or going to one of those big workshops and all those retreats, I don't know how that is in your country, but here we have so many retreats and training where all the authors and workshop leaders, they claim that your life will be better forever. And yes, very often it makes you happy on the short term. But on the long term, you start to feel hungry again, existentially hungry, because it doesn't feel totally fulfilling. And also, when I think about one of my big examples, Viktor Frankl, and I hope that I don't need to introduce him and that you know more about him already. Like, he introduced the topic of meaning in life in the field of psychotherapies and psychiatry. Big example for me and very inspiring. However, when I look at a lot of the things that he says and a lot of his books, I'm very often thinking, What's really the empirical evidence behind it? And very often I start to feel like, well, it feels as if he's leaving out certain topics, which is understandable because he wrote it in the 1940s, 1950s. It was a different time. We didn't have so much research out at the time, and he was more focused on Western countries, for instance, which was in a certain type of culture. So it's understandable that he was not that systematic. But due to that, sometimes the types of meanings he was talking about, his approach to meaning that he was talking about, sometimes seem to be reflective more of his time and period than necessarily what we now know nowadays about all the different countries and cultures across the globe. So I'm even a little bit skeptical about some of those approaches that are strictly based on Viktor Frankl. And to know that a lot of people find him very inspiring, and he is inspiring. But as the scientist in me, I need to listen also like, there may be more than that. So I often use the metaphor of a diamond. If our meaning in life, if that is like a diamond, and you know that in a diamond, it has all those different facets, you know? So that if we want to see as many facets as possible, we need to cast light from as many different angles as possible. And so when we take only one self-help book, or if we take only the opinion from one psychiatrist, there's only one facet. We only see one part of the big diamond. And that one part that they show can be beautiful. However, that may not be the part that's relevant for you. So we should not merely impose our personal opinion or our philosophy, which only shows one facet of the totality that is possible to see. Instead, what we need to do is to be systematic in asking questions and about meaning in life, so that we can cast light from all possible angles, so that we can see as many facets of the diamond as possible. And so this is what I will also be doing today. I'll be trying to cast light from many different angles at the phenomenon of meaning in life, so that we do not only see it in one light and only one facet, but from many different angles. And how do we do that? We do that by asking questions. And I won't go totally into all the hardcore philosophy, but I also have a philosophy background, so I cannot help myself always mentioning a little bit of philosophy. For instance, like the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, he was saying that about everything in life, we can ask 4 questions. Sometimes that is also called causes, ITI. We can ask the questions what, how, who, and why. And he said, well, when we talk about meaning in life, we need to have all 4 of them. But actually, to really find that sense of deep fulfillment, even that may go beyond that. There's something transcendent that goes beyond it even. Then the philosopher Martin Heidegger in the 20th century, he said, well, Aristotle was a very good guy, because what Aristotle tried to do is he was casting light at the facets, from all the different angles, from the what, the how, the who, and the why. However, nowadays, it seems that we've forgotten to ask some of those questions. In modern time, we only seem to be asking the questions what and who. So for example, nowadays, when people talk about meaning, they're talking about being efficient and about materialistic things. But we've forgotten the questions how and why. And Heidegger said we need to return to that. And thus you may be aware, Martin Heidegger then more or less started the existential philosophy revolution, which was later taken over by people like Viktor Frankl, also in psychology. And I would not place myself in the same line of all those big names, but I think that I agree with Heidegger that we are not asking all questions anymore that we can ask. And I think it's important we must do that, because I'm interested in seeing the diamond in its totality and not only 1 or 2 facets. Now, if we really want to do justice to the totality of our meaning in life, we need to ask many more questions. And I'm even saying that even Aristotle didn't ask all questions we could ask. And because what I'm going to do in today's presentation is I'm going to ask 10 questions about meaning in life. It's about what, how, where, when, who, whose, why, and which. And in the end, you as an individual need to answer each question for yourself. You need to find out, what is my answer to this question? And this method to ask all those questions in a very systematic way. That's what I call systematic, pragmatic phenomenological analysis, which I've published 2 years ago. And that's also a very good research method if you want to conduct any research into the lived experiences of a phenomenon. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk in this presentation. I'm going to ask those 10 questions, and I'll focus on what does research say about that. So not my personal opinion, but what does empirical research say about this? First, I'm going to talk about what's the status of meaning in life. What are the myths? What are all the illusions people have about it? What types of meanings are there? How can we approach meaning? When is it? So what's the history, like a world history of meaning? Where is it? What is the cultural political differences? Whose meaning is it about? Is it my personal life story? And how do I find meaning, even in those difficult situations in life? And why? So that's going to be about the existential impact. And what's the impact also on my daily life? Which impact does it have? And when we've answered all those 9 questions, almost like a gestalt, an overarching picture will emerge. And then it becomes much clearer to see the phenomenon that is meaning in life in its totality. And I think it's really important not to leave out some of those questions, but to really ask all those questions, because a lot of the research and a lot of the clinicians only ask one question, and then we can only see one thing. And but if we really want to do justice to it, we need to ask all those questions. Okay, but let's start. Let's start to talk about what's the status about meaning in life. So that's very much about, I'm going to talk about some of the myths or some of the definitions about meaning. Even when I work with clients, in the first session, I usually show this table, and this table is from my book, Meaning in Life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners. I find it important often to talk with people to get rid of some of those myths that a lot of people have about meaning. And I recommend that when you start talking with your clients or colleagues, first give some definitions and get rid of some of those myths that are not grounded in any research evidence. For some individuals, they say that meaning in life, that it's about an absolute ultimate meaning of life. Who am I to say that there's not such, who am I to say that there's not such a thing if all people say there is? But as a psychologist, I don't know. I'm not talking about like a spiritual or a metaphysical truth here. I don't know. As a psychologist, what I can see is that a lot of people describe a lot of different types of meanings. And often individuals experience multiple meanings at the same time in their life. So it does not necessarily need to be that one absolute ultimate meaning of life. Therefore, I often use the expression meaning in life. And even better, I often describe it not as a noun, but as an adjective. So that means I'm often talking about how can we live a meaningful life. And also, of course, meaning in life is not only for religious or spiritual people. It can be for anyone, as we know. It's not only about big things in life. Very often people think about meaning in life as for instance, like marriage or graduation. But hey, meaning in life can already be about, for instance, enjoying that one bird in the park. That can already be very meaningful. Meaning in life is also not unchangeable. It can change. For instance, what was meaningful for us as a kid is often not the same as what's meaningful now. Meaning is also very unique for me. And I need to find out it for myself. No one else can tell me what my meaning is. And I'm responsible for finding it out. No one else can do that for me. And it is also interesting that it seems always possible to find some form of meaning in my life. And also meaning in life is not something that is random. It's not as if I can just make up any type of meaning. No. I have an intuitive hierarchy of meanings in my life. For example, at this moment, I could have been lying in my bed, but I've decided no. Why? Because sharing some of my expertise, meeting you people, that's way more meaningful. So I cannot replace the meaning of giving this lecture. I cannot simply replace that with, for instance, lying in my bed, although I do like to really lie in my bed. But hey, this is way more meaningful. And why? I don't know. it's just my intuition is telling me, yeah, it's very clear that this is meaningful. I need to do this. And so there's also the thing, like meaning is not an abstract theory. It is here and now. It's something I experience. It's an intuition. And it's not something from the books or something I can theorize about. Now, the fact that I'm here and I did not have to think about it, it's a no-brainer, as we say, to be here. And that is often about meaning in life. So meaning in life, it's earlier this morning, you must have heard some of the lectures, for instance, from people such as Michael Steger, who is a very inspiring research, for instance, on his meaning in life questionnaire, which is very inspiring. But the way how he talks about meaning is what I often call the meaningfulness of life. So it's at macro level, an overview, but it doesn't really zoom in. Whereas like I will be zooming into the meso level, as I call that. So these are any types or groups or patterns of meaning in our life. And I'm going to go into more details about it later. And I've developed several questionnaires, how we can talk about that. So for example, I can say that we find meaning in any form of social types of meanings or in a larger purpose in my life. And then I can specify that. But of course, there's also micro level. For instance, what is the meaning of this particular second? Well, that's a totally different story that I won't be talking about. I'll be talking about this kind of the meso level. Also, I've already mentioned that meaning in life is not only theoretical. I often compare that with a kind of a metaphor. Like we can experience meaning in life by taking our towels and lie on the beach. And then we're on the beach and we say, well, I'm now living a meaningful life because I'm on the beach. And there are others who actually sit in an air-conditioned hotel room and watch people on the beach, and they wonder how's it possible that those people live a meaningful life. It feels very cold here. Of course, they're sitting in their hall and they're sitting in the very cold air-conditioned hotel room that is overlooking the beach, and they're looking at the people who are at the beach. But these are two different ways about approaching meaning. We can be inside the hot flow of our experiences of living a meaningful life. And that's, for instance, when we talk about mindfulness, it's being in a moment. And that's why I often talk about, I feel that I'm living a meaningful life. It's an active form of talking, I am here and now. Sometimes clients, they come to me and they start talking in terms of nouns like the meaning of life or about theories. Then I already know that they're not actually living it, but they're observing life as if they are sitting in a very cold, air-conditioned hotel room. And that is precisely the problem for them, is that they are too theoretical, too distant from living a meaningful life. And often that can be caused by many different reasons, possibly because they're too theoretical, too intellectual, but often also when people actually start to feel that life is too much. For instance, when it's too painful after traumatic life experiences, that they start to disconnect emotionally. And then it will be important for them to connect with that hot flow of living a meaningful life again. We'll talk about it later. Okay, what's the definition of meaning in life? Because I've been using that term now a lot, but what is it? So a lot of different researchers use different definitions for it. So what I did is I looked at all the definitions and I looked at what's the research evidence. And I found 26 studies. And then I found out, well, meaning in life is not one thing. It's a lot of different things at the same time. So living a meaningful life is like a total experience, just like the diamond that has many different facets. So I often compare that with sailing. I don't know whether you've ever been sailing, but if you are on a sailing boat, that's more than just going from A to B. It's a total experience. There's a lot going on. In the same way, living a meaningful life, it's the total experience, as if we're sailing through life. And I'll use that metaphor a bit more. For instance, when we're sailing, I will be sailing towards a goal or a purpose at the horizon, such as a lighthouse in the distance. In the same way, we may have goals, destinations, or purposes in our life. However, we can change that, of course. Also, when I'm sailing, I don't want to cheat. So I'm not using a motor, even though my sailing boat may have a motor, because I want to use the sails. I want to use the wind. So I'm using my values. In the same way, we can use our values in the way how we're going in the direction of our purposes or goals, such as being ethical. Also, I can understand my place, my surroundings. I may have an understanding of the map. In the same way, I can be aware of like the place where I live, what I can do, what I must do. For instance, that I need to pay my taxes, things like that. But also being aware of what's the legacy from the generation before me. What's, for instance, like the full climate crisis that we're currently in. To be aware of all those things. This is sometimes also called, people speak in this context often about the coherence of life as well. Navigation skills are very important, because it's great if we know where we are, if we know our goals and our values, but we need to know how to do it. We need to know how to set specific goals, control our responses to the situation, adjust and evaluate our bearings in daily life. So these are very specific goal management skills in daily life. It's just knowing how to do it. And also it's important that people need to feel a sense of self-worth or sense of significance, so that I feel worthy enough to get my sailing boat from the shore and go sailing and follow what's meaningful for me. And for instance, not follow what others have taught me what's meaningful for me. Also important is to have some existential skills so that I can actually survive the storms. Because in life, there will always be challenges and problems and limitations, always. So how can I still live a meaningful life despite of all the emotional turmoil and challenges in life that all of us have? And then finally, very often when I have clients come to me, they may be able to check all those boxes, but they're actually still not doing it. They still need to commit to action. So sometimes I'm telling some of my clients, well, do anything. Just get started. Get your sailing boat off the shore and go on the water. Get your experience. So meaning in life is a combination of all those different aspects. But now, remember, my second question is what? What is meaning in life about? Because this was a very generic definition, but I've already said, I want to zoom in. I want to talk about those types, about the trends in our lives. Because when you think about your life, you'll see a trend. You'll see that you're very often looking for the same types of meanings. For instance, when I talk about myself, like I'm an academic and I love doing research. I love giving lectures and writing. And it comes back again and again and again in my life. So there's a trend there. That's a type of meaning that's very dominant in my life. So the logical question was then, okay, let's have a look at what do people internationally, globally, find meaningful in their life. What I've done, and this has recently been published in the Journal of Constructivist Psychology, and this is possibly my most meaningful article that I will ever publish. Because what I've done is I've reviewed 107 studies in over 45,000 people worldwide. I've reviewed them. And in those studies, people were asked, what's your meaning in life? What's your purpose? What are your values? What's important for you? And I summarized all of that. And then I found 6 categories of meanings in life. Then I operationalized that and created a new questionnaire, which I call the Meaning Sextet questionnaire. And I validated that in more than 1,200 participants in 49 countries. So on this basis, I dare to say that internationally, globally, people seem to be able to experience those 6 types of meaning in life. So this is a global, universal meaning sextet. And why is this important? For instance, when you look at some of those clinicians and practitioners, people like Viktor Frankl, Paul Wong, or for instance, also people like, for instance, Alfred Lengler, or for instance, Breitbart, they're very inspiring, but they mainly focus on social or larger types of meanings in life. They're saying that is where you find meaning. However, a lot of my clients, they also find meaning in materialistic, hedonistic, or self-oriented types of meanings. So by leaving out those bits that also research is saying is meaningful, they feel that they're not doing justice to their life. So it's important as practitioners, as therapists, that we ask our clients, or that we offer them the most widest palette of options possible. So I'll go through those 6 types of meanings very briefly, and you can read more about that in my article. The first types of meanings are materialistic types of meanings, which is about the value of materialized situations, such as having material things, possessions, but also having achieved objective success in your work or in your education. Hedonistic types of meanings are the value of enjoyment and embodied experiences, such as, for instance, your health, sports, sex, fun, reading books, enjoying art. Self-oriented types of meanings is about the value of the self, such as being resilient, having a sense of effectiveness in my daily life, accepting myself, being autonomous, being expressive and creative, and taking care of myself. Then there are the social types of meanings, which is about feeling connected with others, like my family, like my friends, but also a sense of belonging to a specific community. And I found it interesting that this one was particularly important in studies that have been conducted in several Asian countries. And in Western countries, this is a topic that rarely comes up. And also following social expectations, also altruism, which is helping others. And then also giving birth and taking care of the next generations, but also actually looking after any vulnerable people. Then there are the larger types of meanings, which go beyond all of those other types of meanings, which is about specific life purposes, dreams in life, my personal growth. But this is also about having a sense of my temporality. That means a sense of the generation before me and after me, possibly seeing my place in the universe. And also having a sense of justice and ethics. For instance, trying to be an ethical person or trying to make the world a better place. Also, spirituality and religion is a part of this. Then finally, there were some people who were talking about the value of life as such. And they become quite philosophical. I call those existential philosophical types of meanings. So people say that they find meaning in the fact that they are born, that they are alive, they are unique, they're connected, they're free, or they feel greatly grateful for life. So these are the 6 types of meanings in life. And like I said, you can read about that in my article. And it's important to realize that we can experience that one experience or one event can fulfill multiple types of meanings. For instance, this particular lecture, for me, like there may be a materialistic aspect to it. For instance, hopefully that some people will buy some of my books. There's some hedonistic aspects in it, because to be honest, I really find it fun to actually give a lecture. I enjoyed it. I'm passionate about it. But it's also about myself. It's self-development by challenging myself, doing another lecture. It's about social types of meanings, because I find it important to give something to you, to help you to grow. There's a large type of meaning for me, definitely, because I have this passion, this drive to really help people internationally, everywhere, to live a more meaningful life. And there may also be some existential philosophical types of meanings for me behind it, where I feel a sense of responsibility, where I feel, okay, I have this sense, I have this academic knowledge, and I see it as my responsibility to share it with others. So in this example is giving one lecture can have all those different types of meanings at the same time. Also be aware that in this study, I also found the materialistic, hedonistic, and self-oriented types of meanings, they're associated with worse mental and physical health. Whereas like the social and larger types of meanings are associated with much better mental and physical health. And as I will also say later, the social and larger types of meanings, we can mainly find those in non-Western and in countries that are not very capitalistic. Whereas like the materialistic, hedonistic, and self-oriented types of meanings, we find them a lot in neoliberal countries or in cities. And I also found a trend in China, but particularly in a lot of the Chinese cities, where people focus more on materialistic, hedonistic, and self-oriented types of meanings. Whereas people, for instance, on the countryside, focus more on social types of meaning. So the types of meanings answer the question, what? But now there's still the question, how? How do I actually know what meaning in life is? How do I find out about those different types of meaning? How do I do that? To answer that question, I have developed a meaning approach skill, and I've analyzed a lot of research, and I've identified 3 universal approaches how people find the meaning in life. Have a think for yourself. How did you develop your sense of your meaning in life? How do you approach meaning? First, there's a traditional approach, such as people follow their religion, social expectations, or people are born into a position with a predetermined meaning. For example, in the Middle Ages, that in a lot of the Western countries, people were born as a son of a peasant, and they knew, okay, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be a peasant. So that approach is very much about doing, as others say. Then there's a functionalist approach to meaning, which is about you can do anything, regardless of others. So I call it functionalistic because it's almost as if it is a mathematical function, like do behavior X and you'll get Y. That's also what you get in those self-help books, what I've called those Mac meanings before, because they're saying, well, if you just follow those steps from my self-help book, after that, you'll find meaning in life. Well, I hope that you know from experience that life doesn't work that way. It cannot be totally controlled. It's not that simplistic. It's not like in a linear approach. We often cannot control it. But this seems to be a dominant approach in most Western and in most capitalistic countries and economies. Then there's a different approach, which I call a phenomenological approach to meaning, which I often summarize as listening critically to our intuition. And when I use the word intuition, I'm not using it in a religious sense, absolutely not. But it's that gut feeling, you know, that which is more than just an emotion that can just go away. It's a deeper knowing and doing justice to the complexity of myself and my situation. But I also add the word critical there, because it's also saying I'm not a slave to my emotions or my situation. So I listen to actually what something deeper in myself is telling to myself, but I'm still very critical towards that inner voice. And what we know from research is that the phenomenological approach to meaning is associated with a much better mental health, whereas the traditional and the functionalist approach to meaning actually doesn't lead to good mental health. And it's interesting when you actually then start to look at the words people use for meaning in life globally. And when you start to look at the roots of the words, at the etymology, you can actually find those 3 different terms again. For instance, like there's the word vocation, which comes from the Latin word vocare, and which means vocal. It's about saying something, like that someone else or a higher God is calling you and is telling you what to do. You see a lot of cultures and a lot of languages have a word that is derived from that word vocation when they talk about meaning. And there's also a lot of other terms in all the different languages, which have a word that looks a little bit like meaning, which comes from the German word Meinung. And that's like an opinion. It's changeable. It's something you can control. And then there's phenomenological word for meaning, and which is often comes from the German word Sinn, which comes from the Latin sentire, which means perceiving with all our senses. I don't precisely know your language, because I know that we have here a very multicultural people at this conference. But have a think for yourself. Which words do you have in your language, or the different languages you speak? Do you need to recognize those different terms? And what approaches are there implicitly implied in these words? Okay, so let's now put another step back. Okay, we have heard about those different types of meanings that people have, the different approaches that people can have to meaning in life. But how have people evolved meaning over time? And this, of course, is a little bit speculative, because we can't measure anymore totally. We cannot totally go back into evolution in time. We don't have a time machine. But what a lot of people are saying, like when we look at neurobiological research or anthropological research, it seems that existential questions are a byproduct from a neurological and linguistic evolution. Because, for instance, like it is good for our survival value to be able to think ahead, to think about our future. For instance, to start to think, okay, the winter is coming, so I may need to start saving some of my food for winter time when there's not so much food around. But when I start to think about the future, I can also start to think about my future of my life. So in that sense, asking questions about my life, about those existential questions, are like a byproduct from those linguistic and neurological changes that seem to have survival value for our species. And also by asking the question about meaning in life, we start to focus and our limited time and energy in life. And also meaning in life can help us cope with existential topics. But then, of course, interestingly, is that people started to, very early on already in a lot of the Vedic traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism, the oldest text that mankind knows, and also a lot of the older Chinese texts, they all talk in some way about meaning in life. But the way how to do that is in kind of a traditional approach. To remind you, so a traditional approach is, for instance, the people are told by authorities, by the church, or by a philosopher about what their meaning in life should be. And it's interesting that usually those types of meanings that they talk about are those that foster group bonds and the survival of the species, such as do not kill, honor thy parents. And so it's interesting that a lot of the meanings and practices that also religions offer, that they seem to be beneficial for a lot of the group members. Although, of course, at the same time, we also know that, unfortunately, some of the religions can also be too strict and can be too prescriptive and not doing justice to the uniqueness of the individual. So it is a two-edged sword, religions, I think. And so religions, what we see is very often prescribe. People will say that we need to focus on social larger types of meanings. And we know indeed that they are the best for mental and physical health. So it makes sense that religions prescribe them. Makes total sense. However, why are religions not so important anymore nowadays? Why did people start to ask the question, what's my meaning in life? Instead of automatically following what the priest or the philosophers or the authorities told them. So the individualization of existential questions in the majority of a population seems to be a product of a modern time. For instance, because we're not struggling so much for survival anymore. We are educated, we are individualized in a lot of our cultures. So it seems that the traditional approach to meaning has an evolutionary value in collective survival societies, but less in our individualistic abundant societies. And again, like the traditional approach, it's associated with poor mental and physical health for the individual, although it's good for the full group or for the species to survive, but not for the individual. And when individuals, they were able to reflect on themselves, they started to realize, okay, when I do precisely what the church tells me or what the authorities tells me, that's create an inattention. That's not the best for my mental and physical health. So it's logical that people then started to ask for individual answers. And that is where people started to develop this functionalist or phenomenological or critical intuitive approach to life. And so people started to ask then the question about what's my meaning in life? But that individual question is a product of modern time, which only people have started to ask since the 16th century. Before that, no one, or very few people would ask themselves this question, what's the meaning of my life? It's a very, very modern question. At the same time, that's also a question that can be manipulated. And governments and companies do that all the time. They try to functionalistically influence our meaning in life. And this is an example. I live in London, in the United Kingdom, and on an average day, an individual here sees more than 4,000 different slogans and logos from different brands. And they all tell us different things about don't be evil, impossible is nothing, life's good. And I get all those messages, all the subliminal messages about life. And of course, I cannot totally kind of cast away all of that. And because it subtly and implicitly influences me in a subliminal way. That is how our psyche works. So I'm trying to find my own meaning in life, because that is like what we do a lot nowadays. I asked my own question, what's my meaning in life? But at the same time, even though I'm reflecting on that for myself, there's on a subliminal, implicit level, all those messages from companies, but also from governments. And I dare to say, and this is what I write about in my book, The Economics of Meaning in Life. I have a kind of a bold statement, but with a lot of evidence behind it. It's that politicians and economists, they manipulate the meanings of citizens and customers. I've already shown that how companies are trying to sell the product, but promising that the product will give you a sense of meaning in life. In the same way, governments and politicians are trying to manipulate what we think is meaningful and the way how we give that individual answer. So there's a paradox. On the one hand, in modern society, we ask for ourselves the question, what's my meaning in life? But at the same time, the way how I answer it is being bombarded with all the manipulation, all the propaganda from the big companies, from marketing, and from politicians. And when I conducted big meta-analysis, and I've looked at loads of studies in my book on the economics of meaning in life, and I found this very, very significant trend is that in countries that mainly have neoliberal economy, and again, there's a trend in some of the main cities in China, individuals mainly focus on materialistic, hedonistic, and self-oriented types of meanings in a very functionalistic approach. And that's also associated with the largest crisis in mental health. Whereas like countries or individuals who focus more on social and larger types of meanings in a more traditional way or phenomenological way, they do not experience that crisis in mental health. So what we see is that, yes, indeed, it seems that different different types of economic and political systems lead to different ways how people live their lives. It seems that all the marketing from the companies and all the propaganda from the governments is effective. However, changes ahead. Like in the past, when we look at the history of economics, is like in the past, people mainly focused on materialistic types of meanings in a functionalistic way. For instance, like just selling products, just because they are functional. Like for instance, people were selling a car because the car brings you from A to B. However, as we know, in the 60s, 80s, people started to focus also more on it also needs to be fun. And not only that it needs to be functional, but also needs to create fun. By the end of the 21st century, of the 20th century, what we see is that people then started to also focus more on the self, on the sense of self. For instance, when I buy a car, what does the car say about me? If I buy, for instance, like a very cheap brand, how do people think about me then? Instead of when I buy a very expensive car. So it's about an identity. Then around 2000, then people started to talk more about what's called an experience economy. It's that it needs to give me a nice experience. For instance, that's why when you sit in a car nowadays, it gives you a very nice experience, and the way how the full design is created, and with the music, how that's integrated everywhere, it's a nice experience. Whereas in the past, it had to be functional. However, economists have said at the World Economic Forum that we are seeing the biggest transition in economics in history, because nowadays people start to buy products and services because they're meaningful for them, and particularly because they have a social or large meaning to them. So, for example, consumers start to buy products and they make the selection not only because it's functional, but also, for instance, because it's good for nature or for the health. For instance, in the past, people would just buy any random bread in the supermarket that comes from a factory. Now they are thinking more about, okay, I'll go to my local baker because I know his family. I know that there's good bread. It comes from a good farm and it's good for nature, etc. This is a trend we see in many Western countries, at least. And I don't know precisely the trend in China or in Hong Kong, but I'm kind of sure that it will go in the same direction. And so what we see is that meaning becomes at the heart of economics and politics nowadays. It's unavoidable. It's the key. And I've had a lot of requests actually from a lot of different governments in multiple countries where people are very interested in this because it's a hot topic. Okay, so if I'm being manipulated all the time, I get all this input from my parents, from governments, from businesses, how can I find out my own meaning in life? So what I often do is that when I find out my meaning in life, it's a combination of kind of trying to find a balance just between the things that I must do, like the things I can do, and the things I want to do. And very often there's a trend that in my early life, I focus on the things that I must do, the kind of traditional approach a little bit, where, for instance, like I simply do things because my parents tell me that I must go to school. My parents tell me that I must pay my taxes. Later in my life, I start to make decisions on the basis of things I can do. And I start to become more aware of that. And possibly not always doing what others tell me what I must do. And then later in life, I may start to look at what I want to do or what I do not want, but get more in touch with myself. And mainly when we get into the elderly age, we start to balance all of those. So this is how we can develop our own sense of meaning within that context of our economics and political system. And so in the next slides, I'm going to talk a bit more also around how we cope with meaning. And also I'm going to talk also around actually also the impact on our daily life. And I know that my lecture is going to most likely go a little bit longer than an hour, but that's good. Or I think in a sense, like after this, I'm also going to give a workshop. And the workshop anyhow would not take a full hour, so I'll go a little bit more over the time. By the way, I'm seeing some questions also here in the chat. A lot of this information can also be found in my book on meaning in life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners. That is where you can find more about that can, must, want triangle.
Before we go any further, I think there are people waiting to have dialogue with you, and they have questions posted in the internet, in the chat room. Let me see.
Yes, what I can do is that I have a quick look at it, and before I move on.
Look. And then before you move on, okay? And
that's a good idea.
For the time,
Yeah,
this is 4:26. So actually we have 1 hour for the lecture and 1 hour for the workshop.
Yeah.
So there need to be some moderation. Okay, of the 6 types of meaning, are they just interpretations of the actor on himself? The same actions such as reading a book or listening to your talk could be existential to finding meaning or even hedonistic if one enjoys listening to talks.
Absolutely. So this is a thing that an individual can only find out for themselves, where they say, okay, what is the meaning? What type of meaning do I find in this particular event? And it can be that indeed that they listen to a lecture just for hedonistic reasons, but it can also be that they listen to the lecture because it helps them to actually develop themselves. So it's more self-oriented types of meaning. So yes, that's something they need to interpret and decide for themselves. Absolutely.
There is a lot of subjective thing about that. There was
Yes.
another one. I wonder whether meaning in life could be related to the survival of a group or the society, as Hitler personal meaning, thinking that it would be benefit to Germany, is detrimental to Germany, Europe, and the world.
Yeah, there's so much I can say about that. I go into a lot of details in my book of the economics of meaning in life, because this is a big question. It's also a political question, obviously. And so the thing is that imposing one's meaning in a fascist form, as for instance Hitler did, doesn't seem to be for the benefit of a nation or at all in that
That's
sense.
what Hitler, he claims that is for the benefit of the nation.
But I think precisely, but what it's also one of the things that I think we can see also the big trend nowadays is how important it is also for politicians to look at how can they enable and facilitate each individual citizen to live a meaningful life. And in my book on the economics of meaning in life, I have a very clear political stance, and I know that different people may have different ideas, but I personally think that it's important that each individual is able to live a meaningful life. And for me, that is the criterion when I look at governments. And my personal opinion about that, again, is my opinion. I'm not saying anyone else should have that. But to which extent can I facilitate the citizens to live a meaningful life? And I see living a meaningful life as a basic human right. And of course, thousands of different ways how we can talk about it. How do we do that? That will be the big question. And I know that different countries, different economies, different political systems have different answers to that. But yeah.
Okay. Here I have a comment from the audience, which sort of, I agree very much to it. Like summarize a bit of the talk that you just led.
So I can also read here in the chat, a person is asking about research on the type of meaning on the average people of, so I can read a question here about the role of the socioeconomic status and meaning in life. Yeah, that's the research I describe in my book on the economics of meaning in life. And the most important is mainly the economic system. So it seems to be overriding even a lot of the individual differences, and I was really surprised to actually see that. And culture, and that I found it very intriguing, is that cultural values are not that important in predicting what people find as meaning in life. But the economic or political system does explain what people find meaningful in their lives and how they approach meaning in life. And yes, obviously, when we look into the personal life history, that determines very much also like what experiences meaning in life. Like what I've already said is usually when people get older in their life, they will often move more towards a more phenomenological approach to life. Often people start to appreciate the socialized types of meanings more, etc. But I did not find a direct significant correlation between the specific socioeconomic status or income on meaning in life.
Thank you very much, Dr. VOS. There is a comment, I think that the great part is that Dr. VOS has cracked the myths and those off-the-shelf kind of Starbucks fridge magnets philosophies. I think you opened a lot of boxes in your talk, and looks like you still have a lot to deliver, to share with us.
Yes.
How much more?
So it's only like 4 minutes more for this presentation, and then I'll move on to the workshop.
So we'll just move on to your speech and then
cool.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And this is one of the big problems when you're so passionate about what you're doing. And like what I've already mentioned, like giving a lecture is so meaningful for me that I then forget the time and I have too much to tell. And that then becomes a problem in that sense. But what I'll do is I'll finish this lecture, and after that, I'll go into the workshop in a very smooth way. It's a different presentation, so I'll need to open that, but I'll make this shift very quickly. And I had already created in such a way that I can adjust it. That was already my idea anyhow. So I've been talking about how, when we talk about meaning in life, how there's different types of meanings, different approaches to meaning in life. And I've been saying how in different political, economic systems, there are different people have a different approach, or they focus on different types of meanings. However, we are still able to develop our own stance towards that. Like, that's what I was just telling before the kind of the brief break, that I said, well, we still develop our own sense of meaning during a lifetime, between the things that we can do, must do, and what we want to do. Often a sense of meaning is like a balance between that to some extent. But there's an underlying assumption there, and that's that to some extent, we are not totally determined by a situation. We're not totally determined by what others tell us what our meaning in life is. And that's, of course, Viktor Frankl spoke about that when he was speaking about how he, as an inmate in the concentration camp, was even able to find or experience some meaning in that horrific situation. And this has been confirmed by countless studies on how meaning is at the heart of our individual response and the way how we cope with limitations and challenges in life. And I've just written down some of those models that are very common when we talk about meaning and the role in coping with crisis. And in general, I divide them into those models that talk about how meaning feels. For example, when an individual is struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, often a lot of the fundamental ideas about safety in life, the goodness of people, the value of the self, a lot of those very fundamental assumptions about life seem to be undermined. And people need to reconstruct their sense of meaning after trauma. And we also know, and that's what a lot of other models are saying, more from the positive psychology background as well, is saying how meaning actually can be a buffer in times of stress, and how it can actually help people to cope with crisis, and how individuals can live a meaningful life despite of any limitations or struggles that we may have in life. And this is like a slide I often show that I often show to a lot of my clients. And you can find also some workshops on this online on YouTube on the channel from IMEC, the International Meaning Events and Community. And these are all possible changes or experiences, how we can find meaning in situations of change, situations of stress. So for example, starting with the box on the corner left is, we can continue to live a meaningful life like we were doing. For instance, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, we continued, for instance, watching TV and find pleasure in that. But there were also minor changes in living a meaningful life, because we couldn't go to the pub anymore and have a drink with our mate. We couldn't do that anymore. And instead of that, we had to see our friends via Zoom. There can be large positive changes in life. For instance, during the pandemic, we see that people started to focus more on the family instead of on the work. They start to say, well, actually, the work is not that important as I thought it was. There can also be large negative changes in life. Or people can really feel overwhelmed by the existential terror and feel totally frozen in kind of almost like in a trauma stress response. So these are all possible answers or responses people can have to a crisis such as the pandemic. But again, when people start to focus on what's truly meaningful, they seem to benefit a lot from that. And this is also what when I conducted my study on the psychology of COVID-19, and I did a review of a lot of the studies on meaning in life, existential crisis, mental health during the pandemic. It's very clear how meaning is really crucial. I also conducted a survey, and I found in the survey internationally that people who had 3 to 6 examples of dominantly social or large types of meanings, they had a more accurate perception of the health risks, and they had a better mental and physical health. So a sense of meaning in life also helps in a crisis like the pandemic. At the same time, when people feel threatened, people also become more conformist. People start to focus more on conservative type of values. People support more authoritarian and fascist governments. And that's also a thing we see in the voting behavior of people internationally. However, like what I'm already saying is like during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were threatened because, and the threat was real. But to some extent, there was also a bit where it was in their head because some people were really freaking out, really a lot about it, and it had a huge impact on daily life, more than on other people. And this is also something we know from a lot of research. How do we cope with existential threats? It's like, for instance, and that's what terror management theory is saying, is like when we're reminded of our existential condition, we're reminded of our death, we develop some existential moods. For example, we become afraid of death, or we become aware of the meaninglessness in life. We can start to feel uncertain. So when I use the word existential mood, be aware that it's more than just being afraid of death. How do we cope with that? We can cope with that by saying, well, yes, I know that there's a challenge. Yes, I know there's a pandemic. Yes, I know I cannot go to the pub anymore. But at the same time, I can still live a meaningful life. I can still have that duality, that kind of a duality. Well, for some people, in response to that is, like what I've already said, is that existential threat can feel so big that they become like totally in denial, like COVID deniers. And whereas others, what we see is they start to focus on meaning because as a way to help survival. And it can be in a very inauthentic way. For instance, like people start to focus on very authoritarian measures and on becoming more conservative. But also others start to focus more on themselves, like what do I feel as an authentic sense of meaning in life? So what we see is that our meanings shift and change in crisis. And this is also a thing that authorities know and explicitly use. And this is also where the World Health Organization, the communication advice, they have been advising governments to deliberately change the communication style about the COVID-19 pandemic to use those existential mechanisms in the communication. Just a reminder that existential moods, that is more than just think about death. When we talk about meaninglessness, also be aware that a lot of clients, sorry, there's someone at my door. Oh, my apologies for that. I'll be back in 1 second. My apologies for that. That is such a way you give a lecture from home. And I had to go to the door, otherwise I would continue calling. My apologies for that.
That's fine.
So I was saying, when we talk about meaninglessness, it's not the opposite of meaningfulness, because we can still live a meaningful life, even though there may not be such a thing as a pre-given meaning in life, for example. So, and these are my last slides for this presentation before I go into the workshop. It's great that we know we've learned in this lecture a lot about meaning in life, but okay, what do we do with this? In a daily life, a lot of research shows how having a sense of meaning improves our sense of mental health. It lowers our psychological stress, it reduces our anxiety, depression, we're more satisfied about life. And it's mainly, like what I've said before, is when people focus more on the social and larger types of meanings. And when people have a more phenomenological approach instead of traditional approach. And also when people can find a balance between the things they can, must, and want in life. And I've described this in several of my books and in several of my articles, so you can read more about that. But it goes even one step further. Is that meaning in life can also improve our physical health. It improves our blood pressure, our heart rate, the functioning of our immune system. And also I've conducted a huge study and I found out that people who live a meaningful life, they actually seem to have a lower risk for cardiovascular disease. And possibly those effects may be stronger than people taking statins, which is like the medical pharmaceutical drug to lower their cardiovascular risks. And so I'm always saying medical doctors should prescribe meaning in life. And so it seems that meaning really helps people with crisis and lower level of stress. So what I've told you in this lecture is how, in the first place, I said, well, we need to ask a lot of different questions because meaning in life is not one thing. That's also why this lecture is so long, because I said it's not sufficient to only ask one question. We need to ask all those different questions at the same time. And the first I've settled, well, let's get away from those non-systematic populist opinions that people have about meaning and be systematic, look at research. Then I said that there are so many different types of meaning, where the social and larger types of meaning seem to be the best for mental and physical health. I've also said we can approach meaning in a traditional way, functionalist way, or in a more phenomenological way. And I've told you how it seems that people have become, have changed from where in the past humans focus more on a traditional approach, where they focus on social large types of meanings in more modern times, particularly in the neoliberal capitalistic countries, where people are more functionalistic, focusing on materialism, hedonism, self-oriented types of meanings. And whereas like now we seem to be like in a new type of revolution almost towards a more meaning-oriented society. Whereas politicians and companies still try to influence us. But despite of that, we can develop our own sense of meaning in life by trying to make the balance between the things that other people tell us what we must do, what we can do, what we want to do. And also, I can have a sense of meaning despite of the reality that I may be in. And although quite often my meaning can also be under pressure from the existential situation I'm in. And in the end, if I'm able to live a meaningful life, despite of all the things that I'm coping with, all the influences from others, if I can still live a meaningful life, that can really improve my mental and physical well-being. So what can we do with this? I think in the first place, the main answer is take care of your own meaning in life, like you take care of your body. And also, for instance, when you are like a business owner or when you work human resource management, have a think about that. And here are just some examples on the slide, but you can read more about it in my book on the economics of meaning in life. The importance also as a business owner or as human resources to think about what's meaningful for the customers, for our staff. And this is what I'm going to talk about now. Because I'm now going to talk about how can practitioners systematically help clients live a meaningful life in spite of everything. And I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to put up a new PowerPoint presentation for that. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And again, my apologies for going over my time for this first presentation. But if you have any questions in the meantime, please put them in the chat.
Maybe in the meantime, Dr. VOS, we also want to share evaluation form, so the participant can fill out evaluation for your keynote section as well. Okay, maybe for the participant, you can scan the QR code and then take 1 or 2 minutes to finish the evaluation. And then Dr. VOS can take a short break.
Yeah, Dr. VOS, we like to hear from the audience because for me, it's like a big Christmas gift. I gained so much from your speech, your presentation. So I like to hear what the other people have gone through. It's so rich, so much material, so much thoughts in your seminar. Someone want to raise a point here? No. Okay. Yeah, you can leave it in the questionnaire. Your message. Leave your message in the questionnaire.
It's good to read in some of the chats that people have found this inspiring and insightful.
Yes, very inspiring. And you have broken a lot of myths. And I have always thought I know the meaning of life until I hear you talk. And now I realize I really have not given enough thought about it.
I think that when we talk about meaning in life, it's also a topic where we will never be able to find a final answer. And however, we can do loads of research. I can write loads of books about it, but still I will not totally get it. Because that's, I think, the nature of meaning in life. That it is that elusive, we cannot totally pin it down. And the only thing what we can do is